I need a rifle." The room erupted. Not polite laughter, not surprise grenade-burst laughter that rattled off metal walls and left shrapnel in the air. To them, it was the funniest thing they'd heard all week, the quiet armory tech. The grease-stained woman who catalogued bolts and polished brass, standing up in a room full of killers and asking for a sniper rifle. Collins sneered like he was doing me a favor. "What do you know about guns besides wrenches?" The lieutenant colonel's smirk tacked on like punctuation. Their faces said the verdict was already written. I didn't bother answering. Words don't matter when the court has already decided. I stood still, small as a knot of rope against a sea of giants' hair pulled back, hands rough with work, boots stained by 1,000 hours. No one ever noticed. That's what disappearing looked like in uniform. For 6 years, I had been invisible. The woman who wiped carbon from chambers after the men had gone. The quiet one whose handwriting filled the bottom of parts lists nobody read. The ghost in the armory. Then the door opened, and the atmosphere snapped. General Gerald entered like a tone change, quiet. Steady, but absolute. His eyes swept the room, cutting through chatter until they fell on my wrist. The laughter crashed into silence as if someone had pulled the plug. He froze, then stepped back, as if the air itself had been wired with current. My sleeve had slipped, revealing the scar etched into my skin, a burned circle. Cruel and deliberate, split through the middle by a black triangle. Black Talon. The word didn't need to be spoken, but Gerald whispered it anyway. Voice thin with something none of the men had ever heard from him fear. "You're still alive." The room tilted. Operators who moments ago had mocked me now stared like they'd seen a ghost crawl out of its grave. The general asked the only question that mattered. "How many of you are left, sir?" I said. Steady as stone. "Just me." Before we dive into how Jade Monroe, the last of Black Talon, turned a single rifle into the only line of defense against 18 autonomous drones, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your city, your country. We want to know how far this story travels. The shift was instant. 12 men who measured worth in scars and kill counts suddenly saw me as something else entirely. Not the armory tech, not the joke, but a relic of a unit erased from records because its existence was too dangerous to admit. Black Talon was supposed to be gone, consumed in betrayal and silence 12 years ago. Legends whispered that they didn't just win battles, they altered wars. And now the last of them was standing in front of a general, asking for one rifle. The colonel tried to recover, muttering about logic, about wasted equipment, but his voice sounded thin, broken at the edges. Collins' smirk was gone. No one moved, no one breathed. The general cleared the room with a command that brooked no argument, bolted the door, and let the mask of authority slip. His voice cracked. "Jade Monroe, how are you still breathing?" I rolled my sleeve fully. Let the scar speak for itself. "Because 12 years ago," I said, "I saved my last bullet to stop my own team from killing each other." The air recoiled, sharp as a rifle report. He staggered back 3 full steps, as if distance could shield him from the weight of that truth. In that silence, everyone understood this story wasn't just about a mission on a briefing paper, or the drones gathering beyond the perimeter. It was about the kind of truth no dossier could contain. The operators shifted uneasily, and for the first time in their careers, they saw the impossible. The ghost they'd been laughing at was flesh and blood, and she carried a history darker than anyone in that room was ready to face. And yet, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I simply repeated, calm and certain, "Give me the rifle." Because this wasn't a briefing. This was a reckoning. They told stories about Black Talon in whispers, classified footnotes, redacted paragraphs that felt more like warnings than history. 18 months and 11 days of sanctioned disappearance. Born in a flurry of urgency in 2012, dissolved in blood after a mission called Ghost Mirror. You didn't speak its name in polite company. You didn't write it in memos. You remembered it in the way men remember funerals sharp, small, impossible to forget. The folder the general pushed across the desk smelled of paper and cold administration. Photos, timestamps, satellite overlays, intercepted transmissions with parts of voices rubbed out by static. The headline buried inside was simple and ugly betrayal. A mole inside feeds schematics. Someone traffics drone architectures and EMP recipes to buyers who don't care whose cities burn if their pockets line. Black Talon had found the needle in the haystack and paid for it with its body. "You were the last one to fire," General Gerald said, his voice low and uneven. The kind of voice that had barked orders in 7 countries and now sounded like someone who had been punched. "Today, you might have to be the first." The world outside the office felt removed sand. Heat. The hum of generators, but the folder made it close. Intimate. The photographs showed drone swarms in formation. Geometric and terrible, with payloads that screamed electronic death. Their guidance was a lattice of code and signal relays. Someone had taught them how to kill with a kind of math. The same fingerprints that had hollowed out Black Talon were back, echoing through different theaters, different currencies. One quiet pattern repeated until it became a campaign. Jade listened without flinching. She had learned early that shock was a privilege. Rage belonged to people who could afford it. She had been 17 the last time she'd fired as a member of that unit, a weapons savant, plucked out of obscurity for a weird, violent apprenticeship. She'd learned balance, patience, the geometry of breath. She'd learned, in the dark, how to refuse a shot when pulling it might mean something worse. 12 years had taught her how to keep a rifle precise and a soul quieter than the noise around it. Echo Base was broadcasting emergency signals maydays, threaded through static. Systems were dead or misbehaving. Screens that should have been eyes were black. High-grade electronic warfare had bled the place dry. Radar chirped and died. Fire control systems hiccuped like wounded beasts. Everything relied on silicon and software until the software stopped answering. Except one thing. The DSR-50 sat in the armory, like an anachronism purely mechanical. Analog where everything else hummed with code. An instrument that refused to be rendered into uselessness by a network attack. Jade picked it up as if it were a conversation she had been waiting to resume. She ran the bolt, felt the cold metal click, and lowered 3 cartridges into the magazine with hands that had folded more grief than most men carried medals for. "How many do you need?" General Gerald asked, not looking at her but at the ceiling as if there might be an answer taped up among the rafters. "How many shots do I need?" she answered instead. Voice smooth and small. 3. He exhaled something that was not a plan. 1,000 might not be enough, he said, and the words pretended to be hyperbole but were only truth. She slung the rifle over her shoulder as if it had always been there. The weight settled against her back like a promise. Outside. The base compiled what it could, a list of targets, a tangle of officers who'd been specifically pinged in the last hour. This wasn't a rescue. It was a hunting season for the men who had sold them out. Those in the list were being taken down in silence. One by one. Jade tightened the sling, tasted the iron tang of dread and something else focus. Revenge was a compass. Skill was the map. She walked out of the briefing room and into the throb of generators and shouted orders. The sky beyond the compound blackened with heat and distance, and somewhere on that horizon, a formation began to condense. At 0347 hours, Echo Base sent out code Black Total System Failure. The night answered with a distant, mechanical whine, too many small wings, coordinated and cold like an approaching algebra of death. 18 autonomous drones screamed across the night sky, invisible engines cutting the air like scalpels. Soldiers below stood transfixed, hearts hammering, breaths trapped in their throats. Their weapons hung useless at their sides, every system fried, every screen black. Helplessness tasted bitter in the dust. Death itself was inbound, and there was nothing they could do. Nothing except watch one woman climb. Jade Monroe's boots rang against the rusted stairwell of the observation tower. The structure had been abandoned for years, but it rose high above Echo Base like an old sentinel waiting for a final purpose. She moved without hesitation, every step an echo of ghosts long gone. At the top, she laid the DSR-50 across the cracked concrete ledge, her hands calm, her breathing slowing until it became rhythm. Inhale, exhale, silence. The rifle wasn't just steel and polymer, it was memory, it was survival, it was her, down below. The whispers began. Madness, suicide, delusion. What could one woman do against a swarm engineered to erase entire battalions? But through her scope, Jade saw more than metal. She saw the pattern, 12 drones locked in geometric precision. Not chaos, but choreography. Code masquerading as flight, and every hive, no matter how perfect, hides a heart. The first shot cracked the stillness, tearing into the night like judgment. One drone erupted, but its fall was not random. Its collapse fractured the code. The pattern wavered. The sky rippled with confusion. Soldiers gasped as death lost its rhythm. Her second shot wasn't aimed at metal at all. It was aimed at an idea, an invisible relay woven into the swarm's brain. Few even knew such a link existed. Jade did. The bullet severed the connection, and suddenly the drones began tearing into each other, blind and savage. Sparks bled across the horizon as steel preyed on steel. Only 3 remained, but Jade's scope slid past them, stretching 3 miles into the desert night. Their heat shimmer, camo netting, and the unmistakable silhouette of a man wearing advanced piloting gear. A ghost, the one who had bled Black Talon dry all those years ago. The traitor was still alive, and he wasn't alone. 2 figures stepped from the shadows. One lifted a hand and pointed directly at her. This wasn't just an attack, it was a snare. The last ghost of Black Talon had walked into their trap. The surviving drones veered off, hunting her instead. 30 seconds to live. She could vanish, like she'd done before. She could run. But then she saw him, the traitor, raising a sniper rifle. Not at her, but at Echo Base's command center. One squeeze, and everyone below would die. Jade inhaled. The breath of prayer and defiance combined. She aligned her sights, ignored the approaching swarm, and pulled the trigger. The round shattered the relay. The swarm convulsed, then fell, raining metal across the desert like steel rain. For a heartbeat, the world was silent, until her scope found the traitor's eyes across 3 miles of night. 12 years of unfinished war hung in the air between them. He gave a slow, deliberate nod, and then vanished into the dark. Echo Base was alive, but the war had only just begun. The after-action report was as empty as a blank page. 47 words stripped of humanity, reduced to sterile phrases, systems restored, 0 casualties, unknown malfunction. No mention of the woman who had bent the night back toward survival. No record of the lone figure who'd climbed into the teeth of impossible odds. Just silence. Deliberate and absolute. But silence has cracks. Through those cracks, whispers moved. A photograph, unauthorized and untraceable, flickered across encrypted networks. Soldiers stared at it with hushed reverence, a lone silhouette against the full moon, rifle in hand, smoke curling below from drone wreckage. No caption, no credit, no name, just the proof that one person had stood when no one else could. At dawn. General Gerald tried to offer gratitude, but Jade cut him off. "Is Echo secure?" she asked. When he answered yes, she ended the call. By the time the sun broke the horizon, she was gone. No debrief, no farewell, no fanfare. Only a metal nameplate left behind in the mess hall. Her handwriting etched below, "Don't remember my name. Just remember to protect each other." And yet her absence spoke louder than any report. Young recruits began asking questions. Old files were reopened. Patterns of betrayal, bleeding across continents, were pulled into light again. Each discovery carried risk accidents, disappearances, sudden silences. But now there was something else too. Hope. Because somewhere out there, in the spaces between classified lines, Jade Monroe still walked. The last of Black Talon. A ghost operator who chose shadows over recognition, vigilance over safety. Her legend didn't belong to medals or ranks. It belonged to the armory tech tightening a bolt with unexpected precision. The quiet mechanic who worked slower, more careful, knowing the invisible mattered. It belonged to anyone who understood that real power isn't handed down from rank or protocol. It rises in the instant when someone refuses to step back. Jade hadn't returned for glory or vengeance. She came back because no one else could do what had to be done. That's the kind of courage that doesn't ask permission and doesn't wait for applause. And maybe, when the world tilts again toward the edge, she'll be there. Maybe she already is. Because true strength isn't about the weapon you carry, it's about the moment you decide to carry everyone else.